Sup, amigo? I'm Leon, the Paperback Maniac, coming at you with a special author showcase today. You see, I recently realized that I have an inordinate number of books by a certain American author of horror fiction who was very productive in the 1980s and 1990s, and that author would be J.N. Williamson. Now, I'm not going to lie and say I'm a huge fan of J.N. Williamson's. In fact, if I'm being honest, I've only read a handful of his books, mostly nonfiction and anthologies that he edited. I know that there are some pretty strong feelings regarding J.N. Williamson. A lot of people, to put it in no uncertain terms, hate him, and I can see why. If you've ever read any of his introductions of his own work, you might have noticed that he can be quite self-aggrandizing and self-congratulatory, which can understandably irk some people, myself included. And, if you ever read his work, you may have found his prose to be, shall we say, a little overly florid, pretentious, grandiose. He certainly was not of the minimalist camp. Definitely, a little overblown in the writing. In fact, sometimes when I read his stuff, I felt like it was reading bargain basement John Updike, the literary author, trying to write horror fiction. So I can see how some people may not like that. But on the other hand, I got to say the man definitely was nurturing of younger writers. He even, I think, was like an instructor of horror writing in particular for like the Writer's Digest school. And the sheer just productivity that he had is astounding. The number of books that he published, especially, I think his most productive period is like the early 80s, like from 82 to 83. In a span of 10 months, I think he published something like 11 novels, all under his own name, which is quite remarkable. So, of course, when you're writing that fast, quality control, can be an issue. However, these are some pretty cool additions. I've just been picking them up over the years, ever since I started, seriously, collecting paperbacks. Few like 2012, 2013, I started, finding these books on the shelves, picking them up whenever I could. So that's what we're looking at today. It's all about Mr. J.N. Williamson, Mr. Jerry Williamson. So here we go. I try to put these in rough chronological order. I mean, it's hard to do that completely, but the first one is The Ritual. I hope the glare is not going to be too bad. This book was published by Leisure. This edition here was published in 1982, though there was an earlier edition from 1979, it looks like. And this book was the first in the Martin Rubin trilogy. He had 3 books, all concerning the character of Martin Rubin. I have not read any of them, but yeah, we'll take a look at those first. So there's book number 1. And then the second one in that series is Premonition. And this one was published by Leisure in 1981, it says. I don't know how that works, if it's the second one. Like I said, these dates, I can only go by what's either in the book or what's on Goodreads, and a lot of the times I find it's inaccurate. But it's, according to my notes, it's 1981. That is a really cool cover. I really like that cover. Very striking. There's the back. Cool edition of this book. There are a couple of editions of this one, but I think this one's my favorite. And then the third in that series, probably the most nondescript cover, is Brotherkind, and this is the first edition published by Leisure in 1982. There is a later Leisure edition that is probably more common from like the later 80s. It is actually probably a little, has a cooler cover. This one's very kind of basic, but yeah, that is the third in the Martin Rubin trilogy. Okay, next up we've got Ghost Mansion. This one was put out by Zebra in 1981. And this one's also a basic cover, but I kind of dig that. I like the off, kind of the colors scheme there with the pink house. Pretty neat. Okay, next up, this is a cheesy favorite of mine. We've got Horror House. This was published by Playboy paperbacks, back when Playboy had a paperback division, and this was published in 1981. I seem to recall Will Erickson on the great blog Too Much Horror Fiction, shitting on this cover, saying it was like one of the worst he'd ever seen. I don't know. I kind of like it. I mean, yeah, it's really cheesy and stupid, but kind of charming at the same time, in my opinion. Okay, next, this is another cover I really like. This is the Tulpa. This book was published by Leisure. This edition, it looks like, was published in 1985, though it was originally released in 1980. Oh, there's the back. Same animation. This one actually looks pretty fun, I think. I'll probably read this one. Try to get to that one relatively soon. Okay, next we have Extraterrestrial, which he wrote under the pen name Julian Schock. I'm not sure if he wrote any other books under, or published any other books under that pen name. This one was published by Zebra in 1982. As I said, 82 to 83, that was a very busy period for Mr. Williamson. I think he was writing these things like on an average of like, knocking one out in like less than a month, which is pretty insane. Okay, next I have two editions of this one. This is Playmates. This was published, both of these editions I'm going to show you were published by Leisure. This first one was published in 1982, and I really dig this cover. This one is apparently about evil leprechauns and, kind of like Irish curses. And interestingly, I read in an article on Jan Williamson and Fangoria that originally he wrote this book about evil leprechauns and set it in his hometown of Indianapolis, Indiana, where he sets most of his books. And apparently his editor at the time had told him, because this is a book all steeped in Irish folklore, it might be more interesting to set it in Ireland. And so, Jan Williamson kind of scoffed for a moment, but then he thought about it. And apparently then he said, yeah, that's a good idea. He went back, rewrote the entire book to be set in Ireland, which, that's not like a small change. It took some quite big, revisions. And apparently he turned in the new draft in about 2 weeks to his editor. So just to give you an idea of how fast Mr. Williamson worked. It's pretty impressive. So the other edition of Playmates I have, and this one, I've seen this one more often. This one was also published by Leisure the following year, according to this, 1983. That's a cool edition as well. There's the back. I don't know, what's your favorite? Honestly, if I'm looking at them both, I gotta go with this one, man. The one with the scissors. That one to me is it's a little simpler, but more striking. In my opinion. All right, next we've got The Evil One. This book was published by Zebra in 1982 as well. Okay, then we've got The Dentist. Published by Dell. That was another one. He wasn't all Zebra and Leisure. Most of them were, but he also published a few with Dell. This one was published in 1983, and no, I believe it has nothing to do with the fantastically cheesy 90s horror movie, The Dentist, directed by Brian Yuzna. I don't think they're related, but yeah, this one looks pretty fun as well. Okay, I'm a fan of this stupid cover. The next one is Babel's Children. This was also published by Dell in 1984. And that is just, that boy's expression is just sort of inane. I don't know, it's kind of funny. Yeah. Okay, here's a great cover. Next up, we've got The Offspring. This one was published by Leisure, this edition in 1984. And actually, a little trivia, this apparently, according to that Fangoria article, this was the first horror novel that he ever wrote. at the age of 43. That's right. All of these books that he published, and by the way, I don't have all of them. There are even more, many more, I believe. He didn't even start publishing or writing horror until his 40s. This was the first one. This wasn't clearly the first one he published, but he wrote this at the age of 43. And then, the rest is history, I guess, right? Anyway, yeah, so this one was actually published in, like I said, 1984. And really cool pulp cover. All right, next we have Ghost. This one was published by BMI, this edition, which is basically Leisure, in 1987. This edition, it looks like it was first published in 1984. Okay, next we've got The Longest Night. This one was published by Leisure in 1985. Run out of space here. Okay. Next, we've got Evil Offspring. This one was published by Leisure in 1987, and pretty cool cover. Even cooler to think that all those trees, they're in relief. Like, they actually, these publishers really spared no expense back in the day with these covers. They're just like, it's in relief. You can feel it. It was such a tactile thing that is completely lost in this day and age, sadly. Okay, next up, this has got to be like in the running for one of the stupidest covers, yet very, very charming, in my opinion. This is Dead to the World, another BMI edition published in 1988. And yeah, so that's Leisure. So surprisingly, Zebra wasn't the one that had the jogging skeleton. It was actually Leisure. They beat him to the punch. But that is just a ridiculous cover that I knew I had to have the moment I saw this thing. So you even throw it on the spine there. That's amazing. It's just what a great image, right? Great way to sell a book. All right. Next, we got a book called Shadows of Death. This is another one that was published by Dell. This one in 1989. All right. Dang. Okay, next we've got Spree. This one was published by Leisure in 1998. This edition, it was actually originally published under the name The Book of Websters in hardcover in 1993. I've heard this is actually one of his better books. So yeah, sounds pretty interesting. Okay, and then the last novel of his I'm going to show you is Don't Take Away the Light. This one was published by Zebra in 1993, and I have heard from more than one person that this is probably his best written book, and actually some people say maybe his only well-written book, but yeah, we'll see. It does sound pretty interesting. I love horror fiction that involves kids facing off against some sort of evil, supernatural evil especially. So, yes, sounds right up my alley. All right. Now, I've got a couple of collections, like story collections from Mr. Williamson. The first one is pretty rare, I think. This is part of the Author's Choice Monthly, issue number 24, published by Pulp House Publishing, and it's called The Naked Flesh of Feeling. And it has, is this the one that's signed? One of these is signed. No. So it's just kind of just a random collection of some of his short fiction, which he published a lot of. He published just as much short fiction as he did novels. So that is one. Another collection that is, I think, pretty rare. This is like a chapbook type thing. This is the 5th season, and this one I think is signed. Yeah, that one. It's number 84 of, I don't know, like 1500 or something. This was published by Three Stones Publications in 1993. And it's got an introduction by his buddy James Kisner, whose stuff you've definitely seen on this channel in the past. James Kisner was a famous pulp writer, horror writer back then. And then the last collection is Frights of Fancy, and this is sort of like the complete short fiction of his. Might have been published posthumously. This was put out by Leisure in 2000. And yeah, this is one of those. I think this one. So it has an introduction by Ed Gorman, who also published like horror under Daniel Ransom. But I think he also has an introduction in this where he comes off as kind of a prick. So definitely can see how he can turn people off sometimes. All right, now we got a couple of nonfiction things that are really, really fun. The first one, this book is freaking amazing. This is The New Devil's Dictionary, Creepy Cliches and Sinister Synonyms. What a great title, right? And this thing is hilarious. What it is a kind of dictionary for authors, or fictionary, as Mr. Williamson calls it, where it outlines or kind of shows the most common turns of phrase or words that an author might use. So, you know, things like, let's see, breath, dank, fetid, you know, like terms like blinking rapidly, like, right, like just cliches, overused things, chittering, chill, numbing. It's just kind of funny. Like it's meant to, like, for writers but it's not meant to be taken seriously. Clearly, it's just kind of like a joke. But I kind of get a kick out of that. And then he also edited, I should say, this book, which is How to Write Tales of Horror, Fantasy, and Science Fiction. And I've been kind of slowly reading through this. First of all, what an amazing cover, right? Like, that is just beautiful. And this is a great little compendium for any aspiring writers out there, and especially if you write genre stuff, such as the 3 aforementioned genres in the title, you definitely want to look into this. It's basically got essays written by just different genre writers, including Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz has a couple of essays in here that are really good. James Kisner, J.N. Williamson, of course, and many more. And yeah, really interesting. I mean, you know, some of it is dated, obviously, because this was, you know, from the 80s. But a great little resource if you're interested at all in writing. I mean, I used to be interested in writing. I'm kind of just too lazy to be bothered anymore. Every now and then, you know, I feel like I'm in the mood to do that. But this is the kind of thing that is definitely inspiring, and I think would inspire, you know, serious or just people who write as a hobby or whatever. So pretty cool book that he edited. And then the last 3 books we're going to look at are some anthologies, pretty famous anthologies that he edited, because he was known as a famous, you know, editor of horror fiction. The first one is Masks, the first Masks. This was put out by Futura. This edition was put out in 1988, though it was originally published in 1984. And then we've got Masks 2. This is an even better cover right there. This was also put out by Futura in 1989, though it first came out in 1987. An example of me going for the British editions just because they're cooler than the U.S. editions. I don't even remember what the U.S. editions look like. This third one is a U.S. edition. This is Masks 3. The hardcover, first edition. It was put out by St. Martin's Press in 1989. Right as the whole kind of horror salad days were coming to an end. And this is a pretty good, all 3 of those are pretty decent anthologies. I think they've got some cool stories. So if you're into horror fiction, short horror fiction, especially from this time period, look into those Masks books because they're pretty cool. All right, so that's it, guys. That's my collection of Jane Williamson books. I probably have way too many, more than I should have. Who knows if I'll ever read all of those in my lifetime. I better be pretty selective, I guess. If you have read some Jane Williamson, and if you're a fan or if you're not a fan, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what books you liked, what books you hated, why. Let me know. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching the video. Stay. I always fuck that up. Check back later for more videos, more book reviews, and so on. I will see you later. Peace out.